Hi guys, we are back at story time. We haven't had a storytelling session together in a very long time. I apologize for that, but we're back and we are going to continue reading Guardians of Magic. Okay, I'm just going to do a little quick recap before we move on to the next chapter. So the last chapter we read, we were looking at the character of Phoebe. So she's the second main character who has a magic cello. She's a musician and she plays a magical cello. This is a picture of her, and she's been hunted down by two tin men. They've destroyed her room in order to try and find the cello, and now she's trying to hide from them, and the chapter we are on is called The Nightingale Parade. So I don't know if you remember, but Phoebe and her band of cats are playing at this parade, so this is where she is heading now. So let's read chapter 9. The Nightingale Parade. Phoebe walked side by side with young Possum. Behind her, Sydney and Ernest, the other two tabby cats, carried their double basses in cases slung from their shoulders like shields, and kept an eye out for inquisitive beetles. Up ahead, Madame Arpeggio led the way down Copper Pot Alley and into Woodwind Square. The boys and girls of the flute school joined them, together with the tall, serious gentlemen of the Long Recorder Academy. When they reached Trombone Alley, things got a little more chaotic as the tumblehorn players tried to push the long recorders aside. Madame Arpeggio had to take her way to the front and have a stern word with the band leaders before they could all set off again. Soon the procession was making its way up towards the high clock tower that rose above Nightingale's grand central square. As they approached the square, Phoebe saw a tin man pasting a blank sheet of parchment to a wall. As she watched, a copper-coloured beetle with glowing eyes landed on the parchment and scuttled busily across its surface, leaving an inky trail. When it flew off and the tin man marched on, Phoebe gasped. There, on the wall, the ink still wet, was the image of a girl in cat ears holding a cello. Underneath the picture were the words, "If you see this person, report it to the clock tower, by order of the clock maker." Phoebe looked away and pulled the hood of the cape further down over her head. She didn't know what to do. Looking nervously around, heart hammering, she had no choice but to keep going and wait for a chance to escape. The musicians were marching into Clock Tower Square, and Phoebe could see from the opposite side of the square timber wagons arriving to take part in the parade. She also saw pairs of tin men patrolling beetles flying overhead, their glowing eyes examining the members of bands as they passed. There were more of those posters too, and not for the first time, Phoebe wondered whether it would be safer to stay close to the orchestra or try to make a run for it. But how far would she get unless there was some kind of distraction? The townsfolk of Nightingale were even more closely supervised than the musicians, so it made no sense to mingle with the crowd that lined the square on three sides. Rows of tin men surrounded them. The townsfolk looked glum, but when the tin men, at a signal from a hovering beetle, raised their axes, the crowd cheered and they all waved small flags above their heads. Phoebe decided to stick with the cat orchestra for now. The procession marched into the square and began to separate into bands in front of the tall clock tower. The tower rose up from the palace that formed the fourth side of the square. The rows of high windows set into the palace walls were all brightly lit, indicating that the clockmaker was at home and expecting visitors. High above, the clock struck 6. Phoebe, along with everyone else in the square, looked up at its gleaming face. Just below it, a door opened and a tree cut out of a sheet of gleaming gold metal trundled out, followed by a small figure resembling a tin man with an axe. As the clock struck the hour, the Tin Man raised and brought down his axe in time to the chimes. On the 6th stroke, the tree folded on concealed hinges and trundled through a door opposite, with the Tin Man following on behind it. Down in the square, the life-sized tin men raised their axes, and the townsfolk again cheered glumly. As Phoebe took up her place in the back row of the cat orchestra, she watched the usual timber wagons begin to move into position for the parade celebrating this month's harvest of the trees from the great wood. Every month, more and more were felled by order of the clockmaker. Phoebe sometimes wondered how long it would be before there was no more trees left. At the front of the parade, there were small two-wheelers loaded with logs. Next came short, stout ponies pulling big flatbeds piled high with freshly cut timber boards from the sawmills of the nearby towns. Behind the flatbeds were the large timber wagons from the great wood, pulled by a blue oxen with shaggy coats and huge curved horns strung with lanterns. These large wagons were loaded with the trunks of trees only recently chopped down, roped together, and held down beneath large sheets of oilcloth. Behind those was a covered four-wheeler Phoebe hadn't seen before. She could just make out a painted sign on the side, the Erzin Ballet Troupe of the West. It was pulled by two black pack horses with cloth sacks strapped to their backs. Finally, the members of the Tin Man Timber Company pushed their way past from behind the wagons and formed into gleaming ranks. There must have been 300 of them. Taller than the tin men of the town and twice as powerful, these tin men had bigger axes, saws, and hand drills, and 4 beetles perched on each massive shoulder. It was an impressive show of force. Just then, a tin man turned from the crowd closet closest to the cat orchestra and began walking along the row. Phoebe stiffened, and on either side of her, Sydney, Ernest, and young Possum did the same. The Tin Man's eyes glowed as he walked into each cat's face in turn. Phoebe's grip on her instrument case tightened. The Tin Man was almost level with her. She looked up into his glowing eyes. And that's the Tin Man, who is clearly looking for her. So it seems like the clockmaker has made these beetles, which are acting as spies around the city, trying to get rid of the magic. And obviously they've realised that Phoebe possesses a magical cello, and that's why they are trying to find her and capture her. So stay tuned for chapter 10 very, very soon. Bye!